I live in a small, forgettable town wedged between miles of farmland and dense, looming woods. The kind of place where life moves slowly during the day, but the nights, there's something else entirely. It's too quiet after dark, the kind of quiet where your mind starts filling the silence with the things you don't want to think about. I never paid much attention to it before, not until the warehouse. I'd picked up the job on a whim, security at a sprawling old storage facility just outside of town. The pay wasn't great, but it was simple. Sit in the little office, check the cameras, and make a few rounds to ensure no one was trespassing. They mostly stored construction materials, wood, sheet metal, bags of cement. The warehouse itself was a monolith of cold steel and cracked concrete, sitting alone on the edge of a dark stretch of highway. At night, the lot surrounding it was a black void, and the woods pressed up against the back like they were trying to swallow it whole. The first time I drove out there, I remember thinking how the building felt out of place, like it didn't belong. Inside wasn't much better. The air always smelled faintly of dust and mildew, and the dim fluorescent lights gave the space a dull, yellowed glow. My office was a cramped little room with a desk, a flickering overhead light, and a wall of ancient security monitors. There were 5 cameras in total, each showing a different section of the warehouse. 4 of them were clear enough. Rows of shelves, pallets, nothing interesting. But the 5th camera? It was different. It covered the farthest corner of the warehouse, the one closest to the woods. That camera always flickered. The image would stutter, freeze, and sometimes glitch entirely, leaving the screen black for a few seconds before snapping back. Darren, my boss, said it was just a wiring issue. But even when the feed worked, there was something about that corner that felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. It was just a dark, empty space, but every time I looked at it, a knot would tighten in my stomach. I chalked it up to nerves. At first. 3 weeks in, things started to happen. It was a cold Tuesday night, the kind of night where the darkness feels heavier. Somehow. I'd finished my first patrol and was back in the office, slouched in my chair, keeping one eye on the monitors and the other on my phone. The first 4 cameras were normal, just the same empty aisles. I'd walked through an hour earlier, but the 5th screen stopped me cold. There was something there. At first I thought it was a smudge on the monitor, a faint shape, just barely visible, standing in the corner of the frame. I leaned closer, squinting. It looked like a person, a tall figure, their outline blurred and wavering slightly like a mirage. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. No one was supposed to be in the building but me. I reached for the radio, but my hand hovered over it. Darren had already dismissed my complaints about the camera once. I could hear his voice in my head. It's a glitch. Relax. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I forced myself to look away from the monitor, to focus on anything else. But even as I stared at my phone, my mind kept replaying that image, that shape. The next night, it was worse. This time, the figure wasn't just a blurry outline, it was clear. A man in a dark coat, standing stock still in the middle of the screen. His head was tilted slightly, almost like he was looking at me through the camera. I bolted upright, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. My skin prickled as I stared at the monitor, my brain scrambling to make sense of it. He didn't move. He just stood there, perfectly still, his face obscured by shadow or static. I couldn't tell which. I knew I had to check it out. As much as I didn't want to, I couldn't just ignore it. My flashlight felt too small in my hand as I stepped out into the warehouse. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft crunch of my boots on the concrete. The aisles stretched out endlessly, the shadows between the shelves deeper than they had any right to be. When I reached the far corner, the air felt colder. My breath fogged in front of me. But when I shined the light on the spot where the man had been, there was nothing. Just an empty space. And the footprints. They were fresh, clear in the layer of dust on the floor. 2 sets, leading into the corner. None leading out. By the 3rd night, I was already on edge before I even clocked in. The moment I stepped into the office, I checked the cameras. My stomach dropped. He wasn't in the corner anymore. He was closer. The figure now stood in the middle of an aisle, perfectly framed by the camera. His head twitched, jerking slightly to the side. It wasn't natural. It wasn't right. I grabbed my flashlight and the radio, my hands trembling. "Darren," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone's in here." I need backup. His reply was sluggish, annoyed. It's a glitch, man. Go home if you're freaked out. I slammed the radio down, fury and fear twisting together in my chest. I wasn't imagining this. I couldn't be. Steeling myself, I stepped into the warehouse. The darkness felt thicker tonight, almost tangible. Every sound was amplified, the creak of the building, the hum of the lights. I turned a corner and my flashlight flickered. For a split second, the beam illuminated him. He was there, just a few feet ahead, too close. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my hand. The light died, plunging the aisle into blackness. My breath hitched as the sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere behind me. Slow. Deliberate. I ran. The door wouldn't open. My fingers fumbled with the lock, the cold metal biting into my skin. The footsteps grew louder, closer, but I couldn't turn around. I didn't want to see him again. The lights went out. When I woke up, I was outside. The sky was gray, the first light of dawn bleeding through the clouds. I was lying in the gravel, my flashlight shattered beside me. The warehouse door stood wide open, yawning, like a black maw. I quit that morning. Darren didn't believe a word I said, and honestly, I don't blame him. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived it, but I can't forget. Every so often, I dream about that place, about the fifth camera, and in the dream, he's closer than before, his featureless face somehow staring right at me. One of these nights, I'm afraid I won't wake up.